Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this specially recorded residency roundtable session. My name is Emily Zielinski. I am currently a PGY5 orthopedic surgery resident at Indiana University in Indianapolis. I also completed my medical school education at Indiana University as well, and then ultimately stayed here for residency. I am a senior tutor and residency advisor at Elite Medical Prep and have been with the company since 2019. So I'm super excited to offer you all this bonus session on how to go about obtaining letters of recommendation in support of your residency applications. So let's jump into it. Okay, so here's a brief review of the residency timeline or roadmap that we created for you all to help you stay on track as you're preparing your materials for your residency application submission. We are currently in July of 2023, and so at this point, hopefully, you have kind of already decided who you're planning to obtain letters of recommendation from, and you may have already asked some of your letter writers for letters of recommendation, or hopefully are planning to do so soon. And then by August, you'll want to make sure that you've got your letters of recommendation nearly uploaded. If your letter writers haven't been able to finish the letters of recommendation, you'll want to send reminder emails at that point, and then start considering kind of which letters of recommendation you're going to attach to what programs, and start uploading your documents as needed. Okay, so the first step in all of that, though, is to start by choosing your letter writers. So how do you choose your letter writers? Well, first step is to generate a list of faculty names of people that you've worked with closely during your time in medical school within each specialty that you plan to apply to. If you're planning to apply to general surgery and also anesthesia, you'll want to have 3 letters of recommendation from from faculty within each of those 2 specialties to be able to support your application to various gen surg and anesthesia programs, for example. So generate a list of names of people that you cross paths with, maybe people you worked with when you were a 3rd-year medical student, people you worked with on your 4th-year rotations, and then start to try to order those people in order of those that you've worked with the most to those that you've worked with the least. And then additionally here, you'll want to include, consider including rather, additional non-MD, non-DO faculty that you may have worked with in a research capacity, or perhaps if you completed an MPH or an MBA during, during your medical school education, if you took a year off to participate in any of those programs. I think it's definitely reasonable to consider asking a mentor from those specialties, for a letter of recommendation, because they might be able to comment on different skill sets that you have that they've been able to observe during their time with you, especially if they worked with you for a very prolonged period of time, over a year, for example. So then again, you'll want to generate this list, and you'll want to order these people from those that you worked with the most to those that you worked with the least. And then once you have a list kind of in an idea of who you want to prioritize potentially for letters of recommendation, I recommend that you review this list with a current resident in the specialty that you plan to apply to at your program, or a recent graduate from your institution who may have applied to the same specialty, or a faculty mentor that you might have been assigned when you originally kind of showed interest in that specialty. And the purpose of kind of reviewing that list of people with somebody who has experience in that specialty is just that those people probably have worked with the same faculty members, and they kind of know who writes the best letters of recommendation. And what I mean by, who writes the best letters of recommendation is just that some professors are more apt to use a template, and they kind of just plug and chug different aspects of your application into their template. And they'll just say, I worked with Sally, for example, for a month on her rotation. Sally is a very dedicated medical student. She has spent a lot of time in X, Y, and Z groups. They'll just kind of input whatever information you give them into their letter of recommendation, but it may not really speak too much to who you are as a person, or be very detailed about, your specific skill sets that they might have observed on rotation with you. Whereas there are other faculty members who maybe are known for writing very positive, like beaming, over the top types of letters of recommendation, which can be really helpful in supporting your application for residency. So it's good to get some insider info from people who know these faculty members as well. And then once you've talked to them, you can really hone in on who you're going to ask for your letters of recommendation. So once you've decided who you're going to prioritize asking, the next step is kind of actually asking them. So things to consider. One, timing is everything. So when you're asking people for letters of recommendation, the reality is that, there are tons of medical students potentially who these faculty members are going to cross paths with in a year. And so you want to make sure that you're asking them for letters of recommendation when their memory of you is pretty fresh. And so ideally, I would recommend that you kind of reach out to a faculty person. If you're going to be on rotation for a month and during the first couple weeks of the rotation, you feel like you've gotten to know that faculty pretty well, and you might want to ask them for a letter of recommendation, then you should plan to, pull them aside and ask if it would be okay to set up a meeting with them, during your last week on service with them, or send them an email right at the conclusion of your rotation and ask to set up a meeting, a week after you've finished your rotation. And the benefit again of that is just that they'll kind of remember you, and they'll be able to write, they'll probably write the letter of recommendation in that moment, or very soon after they meet with you. And so they'll be able to really input a lot of specific details about their time with you in that letter, which kind of shows just, to what extent they've worked with you. And then, I think it's always best to ask people for letters of recommendation in person. I think it shows a lot of kind of confidence on your part. And it's a very mature way to go about obtaining these letters of recommendation. And additionally, you'll get a lot more honesty from people, I think, when you ask them for a letter in person. If they aren't comfortable writing you a letter, they'll be able to tell you that. Whereas like if you email somebody, it's very easy for them to just say sure and write kind of a basic letter of recommendation. But that kind of leads into my second point, which is that it's super important for you to ask faculty members if they are comfortable writing you strong letters of recommendation. Now, the insertion of the word strong may seem kind of inconsequential or unimportant to some people, but ultimately, I think this is the most important aspect of asking people for letters of recommendation, because if you just say, will you write me a letter of recommendation, the faculty member can ultimately write whatever they want in that letter of recommendation. It could be a very average letter of recommendation. And ultimately, average letters of recommendation don't really help to set you apart from other candidates like you that are applying to the same specialty. You want strong letters of recommendation that are really going to speak to who you are, what you're all about, and how awesome you are at being a medical student, and how awesome you will be at being a resident. So if you ask a faculty member, would you be able to write me a strong letter of recommendation? Hopefully the answer will be yes. But what do you do if the faculty member says no? Well, one, you should take their honesty and kind of accept it and be grateful that they were able to say, that they did tell you in advance if they don't feel like they can write you a really good letter of recommendation. Because the last thing, again, that you want is somebody to write you a letter of recommendation that is average or even slightly negative, perhaps, and then have that hose you for this application process. So honesty is always best. And if they tell you no, then I think you have two different options. You can either say, okay, I appreciate your honesty. I don't know if you'd be willing to provide any other information as to why you don't think you could write me a strong letter of recommendation. Is there any feedback you can give me regarding my performance? If there's something that I didn't do very well that I should work on, that would be super helpful for me going forward on my other rotations. And then, the other thing you could consider is if they simply don't feel comfortable because they didn't work with you enough. And so if that's it, and you say, why do you, if you wouldn't mind just providing me with a little bit of information as to why, and they say, I didn't feel, I was only able to work with you for 2 weeks, and I don't think that I've spent enough time with you to be able to write a really strong letter of recommendation, then you might be able to offer to spend additional week on service with that person, if your schedule allows. But ultimately, that's kind of up to you and your own discretion. And that's something that you'll want to feel out when you have this meeting with a faculty person, to kind of discuss with them whether or not you will be able to add in additional kind of points of contact for them to bolster their letter of recommendation. So next, after you've asked them, they say yes, hopefully, and they're ready to write you letters of recommendation. You'll hopefully you've kind of set this meeting to ask them for a letter of recommendation. So then you can consider using the rest of your meeting with them as an opportunity to, one, remind them of different experiences or specific interactions you had with that faculty member while you were on service with them. So you can kind of talk about how much you learned from, a specific surgery you observed with them, or a specific patient interaction, or a specific, differential diagnosis that you all were generating while on rounds one morning, what have you, and kind of including those specific anecdotes and stories of your time together can help your letter writer write a more detailed letter about you. And then additionally, you may want to consider using this meeting that you've set with them to kind of discuss your overall competitiveness for the specialty you intend to apply to. You can ask them for feedback on your rotation, because again, you ideally will be asking these people for letters of recommendation during the last week on service, or within 1 week of finishing your rotation at that program. And then additionally, you can ask for their opinion on specific programs you might be considering applying to. The letter writers the faculty certainly, they've all trained at different institutions, so they can probably give you some insider insight on specific programs and pros and cons of different programs. And so after you've asked them for your letters of recommendation, you've had this meeting with your letter writers, hopefully to kind of discuss things. You should be prepared to provide them with a copy of your CV, a copy of your personal statement, and then any specific information you'd like them to include as well. So they may ask you, is there anything specific you want me to talk about in your letter of recommendation? And maybe if you presented a research project with that faculty, you might ask them to just kind of comment on your ability to do research, or if there was like any sort of specific patient interaction that you had that you felt like really showed your skill set. You might ask them to include a few sentences on your ability to relate to patients, or what have you, in the context of some specific interaction. Whatever is kind of pertinent to your time with them and your relationship with that letter writer that you think would really strengthen the perception of you based on their letter of recommendation would be helpful. And then additionally, you'll want to provide them with any information on specialty specific standardized letter requirements, which we'll touch on a little bit on the next slide. But basically, the moral of the story is be prepared, do your research, and try to minimize the times that you have to go, how many times you have to actually go back to this letter writer and ask them for something else. So some residency programs have instituted these standardized letters of recommendation requirements that are templated and unique to each specialty. And the requirements can vary by specialty and by program as well. So even within a specialty, some programs may be requiring that all letters of recommendation are in this specific format. Some may say that they accept this standardized format, but they don't require it. And so you'll want to make sure that you're spending a few minutes looking at each website for each individual program that you plan to apply to. So for example, if you wanted to know about the University of Wisconsin, you could Google, University of Wisconsin internal medicine residency, how to apply. And usually that should give you, bring you to a web page that says kind of application requirements or how to apply, whatever. And on those websites, the program should be listing specific requirements that they have. And they will also include there how many letters they want or allow. So on ERAS, you are able to upload up to 4 letters of recommendation with each application to a specific program. But there are some programs that may say, we only want to receive 3 letters of recommendation. If you upload a 4th letter of recommendation for your application to our program, we will throw out 1 letter of recommendation at random, and or we may just throw out your application entirely because you didn't read the rules. Now that seems kind of silly, but ultimately a lot of these programs are just trying to find ways to minimize the number of applications that they have to read through. And so hinging on some kind of like silly rules that are listed on their website does unfortunately happen. And so you have to realize that you need to go to these individual program websites and not rely solely on the information that's presented in ERAS, because ultimately a lot of these programs do include specific instructions on their homepage website. Some places will say, you know, submit as a separate document, as a separate letter of recommendation. We want you to upload a paragraph stating why you're interested in our program, et cetera, et cetera. You will find that. It's annoying. It's very tedious to go to each of these websites, but it would behoove you to do that. And then beyond that, there are some specialty, again, specific standardized letter of recommendation requirements. So for internal medicine, for example, down here on the bottom left, you can see the Alliance for Academic Internal Medicine. That organization has guidelines for the structured evaluative letter, which is the chair letter that every candidate applying to internal medicine needs from their home institution. And you can read on this website, just kind of read up on it and know what the chairperson is supposed to be writing in your letter of recommendation. I think most institutions have the chairperson of medicine meet with every applicant from that year to kind of create this structured evaluative letter. And there's different components of it that need to be included. And so you should just be prepared when you have that meeting with your chairperson with whatever information is needed to go into that letter so that you can make the whole process streamlined. Additionally, for emergency medicine, there is a standardized letter of evaluation called the SLO. And this standardized format is required by all emergency medicine programs across the country. And it's kind of it's an emergency medicine specific format. So you can get information about that from the emergency medicine kind of board website. And then most of the letter writers now for emergency medicine, this is not a super new thing. So most people who are writing letters of recommendation for you will have familiarity with how to generate this standardized letter of evaluation. But it would behoove you to also be prepared and know that that's something that you're going to need, just in the event that you ask somebody for a letter and they aren't aware of this format. You don't want to have to then obtain this letter of recommendation from them and then go back and say, hey, actually, I'm so sorry, but can you fill it out in this other format because I need this specific standardized letter. So, and then with that as well, within orthopedics, there's a similar kind of standardized letter of recommendation. And ultimately, these standardized letters typically include just kind of a scale that the letter writer is supposed to grade the applicant on, you know, a scale of 1 to 10, how are the applicant's skills with respect to professionalism, communication, patient care, you know, and things like that. And so they kind of give each candidate a grade based on a scale. And then the purpose of these structured or standardized letters is just to try to better distinguish between candidates and also hopefully decrease some of the variability in the way that letters of recommendation are written, so that it's more uniform across the board how these letters of recommendation are playing into your application. And then real briefly, just the basics of ERAS. So for each of these letters of recommendation, once you've asked your letter writer, you've had your meeting with them, you've given them all of the information, the CV, the personal statement, again, those types of things so that they can write a really good letter about you. Then you'll want to enter each individual letter writer's name and details in ERAS to generate an upload link for them to use to upload your letter of recommendation. So each entry needs to include the following information. You'll have your author name, so whatever the faculty's name is, and then their title and their department. So if it's the chairperson of orthopedics, for example, or if it's the program director for internal medicine at that institution, whatever, you'll kind of put their title in there and the department. You will also have to check a box selecting whether or not you're waiving your right to review the letter. Pretty much universally, you should be waiving your right to review letters of recommendation because that is important insofar as it kind of demonstrates that these letters of recommendation are not being tampered with and there's no undue influence on what's written in the letter of recommendation because you read it or you had the opportunity to edit it or something like that. Some letter writers may still send you a copy of their letter of recommendation. But ultimately, by checking that box, you're saying like, I'm okay with this letter being uploaded without me seeing it. So you're okay with it. If they still send you a copy of it, that's fine, but you'll need to check the box saying that you're waiving your right to review the letter. And then you'll want to include as well the specialty to which the letter will be assigned. So I'll show this on the other page on the next slide, but ultimately you can choose what specialty you're planning on. You can kind of include on your entry what specialty you're planning to use that letter for, but that specialty assignment will only show up to you. So it won't be viewable to programs when you've attached letters to your application for each individual program. It's just kind of a helpful tool for you to use to verify that when you're assigning your letters of recommendation to programs, if you are applying to 2 specialties, it makes it quicker that you can see that the specialty that you assigned that letter to is general surgery. So then you can assign that letter to each of the general surgery programs you apply to, and then you can use your other letters for your anesthesia application, or vice versa. So it helps to minimize, it's just another thing for you to quickly glance at to make sure that you're uploading the correct letters of recommendation with the correct application to specialty specific programs. Okay, so and then you'll also include the program, like I said, with the department title and author title. You'll be able to include program director or department chair, but there's also a separate box for you to click to say that letter of recommendation is going to be coming from the chairperson, so that it's easier to ensure that you've got a chair letter in support of your application and things like that if that's required. And then once you've finalized or saved your entry, for each individual author writer, there will be an email button that says like send link to for upload. And so with for each author, you will just be able to click within ERAS. You'll be able to click a link or click a button off to the side of that specific author's name that says send email link for upload. And so you'll just send them a link, and then there's an ability to write some text with your email to your letter writer and say, hi, so-and-so, thank you so much for agreeing to write a letter of recommendation for my application. Below is the link to use to upload the letter directly to ERAS. Let me know if you have any issues. So you have a text box with some characters that you can use when that email goes out. And then lastly, you'll want to confirm your letters of recommendation were uploaded, and then you'll want to start assigning them to the programs that you're planning to apply to. So within the ERAS portal, you can look under letters of recommendation, and you should see a page that looks kind of like this, where you will see the name of the person, their title, and their kind of department association at your institution. And all of that is information, again, that you have input. And then you'll see the specialty assignment. And again, the specialty assignment is only going to be visible to you and not visible to the programs that you apply to. Again, it's just another helpful tool that you can use to make sure that you're keeping your letters straight and you're not assigning an ortho letter to an anesthesia program or vice versa. You'll also see the letter ID number, and then you'll see a status column as well that lets you know if the letter has been uploaded and at what date it was uploaded. So then you can decide, hopefully you're able to confirm all your letters are there, but if they're not, you'll see that it has not been uploaded, and you could choose at that point to send a reminder email to a faculty member to make sure that they get their upload done in time. And then once your letters are uploaded, you can start assigning them to programs. So you won't be able to assign a letter to a program unless it's been uploaded. But you can go into each program that you're planning to apply to within ERAS, and you'll just kind of click a checkbox next to the letters you want to associate with that application to that specific program. And that's pretty much all we have on letters of recommendation. I'm going to take a quick minute just to answer a couple of questions that are pretty common that we've gotten with respect to letters of recommendation. So the first question that comes up a lot is, if I have if a program only allows applicants to submit 3 letters of recommendation, but I have 4 letters of recommendation, should I prioritize the letter from a higher up or more distinguished faculty person at my institution, or would it be better to use a letter from a more junior faculty that I may have worked with more closely? And I think this is a good question. It comes up a lot, right? The idea that you could have a faculty member who's more well-known, and does that carry more weight with your application? Or is it better to have a letter of recommendation from somebody who really knows you? I've talked to many other residency advisors and residents like myself who've gone through this process and helped a lot of students. And we all unanimously feel that it is way better to have a letter of recommendation from somebody who knows you as a person and has worked with you very closely. They're going to write you a much stronger letter of recommendation than somebody who you may have had less contact with, that is a more distinguished faculty person. Ultimately, the name of the person writing the letter of recommendation is not going to hold as much weight as what is written in the letter of recommendation. So, in the rare circumstance, if you've worked with somebody who's really high up at your institution and you've spent a lot of time with them and you have a longitudinal relationship with them and they're going to write you a really strong letter of recommendation, then that's one thing. But if you're choosing between kind of the more higher up faculty person and the more junior faculty person that you've really worked with more, prioritize the letter from the person who knows you the best. That will always be the strongest letter for sure. And then the other question that we get sometimes with respect to international medical graduates is just, do all of my letters of recommendation need to be from US faculty? And I think along the same lines, you want to consider the relationship you have with your letter writers. So in general, if you're applying to US residencies, you do want to have some letters of recommendation from faculty in the US to demonstrate that you've made relationships with faculty in the US and there's been faculty in the US who have been able to observe your skills and help with your education. So they're going to be able to comment on kind of how you will function in a US residency, for example. But ultimately, if you have a faculty person that you're very close with at your home institution that you've worked with for a number of years or had a longitudinal relationship with, or you worked with for a couple of months, even somebody who knows you really well, then I would prioritize that letter of recommendation over, a US letter of recommendation from somebody that maybe only worked with you for a week or 2 weeks. So again, you want to kind of be weighing the pros and cons of the name of the person or the association of the person who's writing the letter of recommendation. And then also, the extent to which you've actually worked with that person and they know you. And it's not always super straightforward, but I would say in general, those are kind of the best tips to get the most bang for your buck with respect to letters of recommendation when you're putting together your ERAS application. As always, feel free to reach out to us either by email or on our website. We are happy to answer any other questions about letters of recommendation and or help you with your residency advising as you get ready for this 2023-2024 ERAS season. Thanks so much, and best of luck to all of you.